again, Matthew 5, verse 8, looking at personality of the Sermon on the Mount life, what we have to be in order to live this life. In other words, it's not merely an external life. It requires that we be something. Verse 8, blessed are the pure in heart, they shall see God. Blessed are the pure in heart. The word pure is the Greek word katharos. It's translated 1 Timothy 1, verse 5, as pure in heart. 1 Timothy 3, verse 9, it's pure conscience. 2 Timothy 1, 3, it's pure conscience. 2 Timothy 2:22, it's pure heart. In Hebrews 10, verse 22, it's referred to as a true heart. Same word, there's translated true. James 1:27, it's pure religion. And 1 Peter 1:22, it is pure heart. The meaning, of course, is that which has been purified, that which is clean, but it's also that which is unmixed. It's unmixed. It's not defiled. And again, this is a state of being, the pure in heart. It's not just external acts of purity or holiness. It is a state of being. And we cannot consistently live the life that is presented here in the Sermon on the Mount without this state of being. So the seat of the purity is the heart. The implication, of course, is that he's talking about something inward. He's talking about an inward purity. But it's purity of heart. So it is an inward purity that affects the entire person. So it is a state of being that affects our entire person. It is in direct opposition to Pharisaic, quote-unquote, purity, which was merely external. It was merely external acts without the heart. And we see in Matthew 5, verse 20, that except your righteousness shall exceed the righteousness of the scribes and Pharisees, which was merely external, ye shall in no case enter into the kingdom of heaven. So it's opposite that. Pharisaical purity was external. This is something that's in the heart that will have an effect upon the external. Notice in Matthew 23, Jesus, one of the many times that he condemned Pharisaical purity, in Matthew 23, verse 25, he says, you can go all the way up here in Matthew 23 and see the various rebukes, but we'll begin in verse 25. Woe unto you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites! For you make clean the outside of the cup and of the platter, but within they are full of extortion and excess. Thou blind Pharisee, cleanse first that which is within the cup and platter, that the outside of them may be clean also. Woe unto you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites! For ye are like unto whited sepulchres, which indeed appear beautiful outward, but are within full of dead men's bones and of all uncleanness. Even so ye also outwardly appear righteous unto men, but within ye are full of hypocrisy and iniquity. So the Lord puts the emphasis upon within. And that's what He's doing here in our text, the pure in heart. The heart is the fountain. The heart is the fountain, and purity of heart results in purity of life. So we're not doing away with the external. We're not doing away with outward works, but the emphasis is upon the internal, and the internal produces outward works, and that's Christianity. So what is purity of heart? Well, it implies a heart that has been made new. It implies the work of the Lord. We cannot make our hearts pure. That is the work of God. The heart of man, of course, is naturally unclean. Jeremiah 17, verse 9. It's so unclean that we cannot understand it. It's not within man's ability to make it clean. We read that in Job chapter 15, verse 14. The heart by nature is hard, but at salvation the Lord gives a tender heart of flesh. And we see that in Ezekiel 11, verse 19, and Ezekiel 36, verse 26. A heart of flesh is a heart that can feel, and it's a heart that responds. No one can have purity of heart that has not been made anew by the Lord's amazing grace. So it's a work of God. And of course, the work of God precedes the life that we're talking about. There has to be a work of God. Just religion will not result in this life. Doctrinal belief will not result in this life. The heart has to be made anew before we can live the Christian life, before we can live this life that is described here in the Sermon on the Mount. So a pure heart is a heart that's been made anew. It is also a heart of purity of heart is holiness. It is godliness. Now, those two, holiness, godliness. Once again, that's more than a formality. That's more than just outward works. They are inward forces. Notice in 2 Timothy, familiar verse, chapter 3, verse 5. 2 Timothy, chapter 3, verse 5. Having a form of godliness. Just a form. It's not godliness. It is a form of godliness. And the reason it's just a form is because the power's not there. But denying the power thereof from such, turn away. So, purity of heart is holiness within. It is godliness within. There is such a thing as a form of godliness. The problem with that is it does not have power. It does not have power. So purity of heart consists of holiness within, godliness within, It is holy in our being. It is godly in our being. And such is so much more than knowledge about spiritual things. You can have knowledge about spiritual things that will not result in the life that is being described, nor will it enable you to consistently live the life that is described. It takes something more than knowledge of spiritual things. And we ought to have knowledge of spiritual things, but we need to know the proper place of that. It is more than a profession of faith. Anyone can make a profession of faith. That does not necessitate the reality of it. So anyone can make a profession of faith. This holiness, this godliness, is more than a profession of faith. A profession of faith does not make you holy. A profession of faith does not make you godly. But this holiness and godliness that's within is more than a profession of faith. It's more than doing. It's more than external activities. And again, it's more than zeal. It's more than morality. A lot of people are moral. Doesn't mean they're saved. This is something that's more than morality. It will lead to morality. It will result in morality. Holiness and godliness isn't going to result in immorality. It's going to result in morality, but it's more than morality. It's more than desire for spiritual things. I believe to a certain degree that even an unsaved person can have a desire for spiritual things. It's not consistent, and may not be a whole lot of depth, but what we're talking about, holiness and godliness, goes further than just an occasional spiritual desire. It's more than enjoyment of spiritual truth. People enjoy truth. Some. That doesn't mean they're saved. It doesn't mean that they are godly. It doesn't mean that they're holy. So these things, holiness and godliness is more than this. It's more than fellowship with God's people. Now it includes all of these, but it's more. When we talk about holiness and godliness, it's more. And though the life that is presented and illustrated in the Sermon on the Mount involves the external, it requires much more than mere external living. So this life is not apart from a heart of purity. It is not apart from purity of heart. It is a life that necessitates purity of heart. It is a life of holiness and godliness. Now this purity, this holiness, this godliness of heart is the impression and workmanship of God in a person. This person has been changed. They have been changed. They have been made anew. And this purity that is within, this holiness that is within, this godliness that is within is intense. It is powerful. It is fervent. It is energetic. It does not lie dormant in the heart. It, again, is powerful. Again, there is a form of godliness without power. But when we're talking about purity of heart, we're talking about something that's powerful, something that's energetic, something that is going to affect one's entire being. So this purity, this holiness, this godliness is a working force within. And it's extensive. It spreads into the soul. And it has a direct effect upon the understanding. It has a direct effect upon our reasoning. It has a direct effect upon our will, our affections, and our overall life. So this purity, this holiness, this godliness of heart, it results, 1 Timothy 2, verse 2, well, let's turn there. 1 Timothy 2, verse 2. For kings and for all that are in authority, that we may lead a quiet and peaceable life in all godliness. It is a life in all godliness. That's what this purity of heart produces. We see in 1 Timothy 2:10, godliness with good works. Godliness with good works. Godliness produces good works. Good works are the result of this godliness, this holiness, this purity. So this purity, this holiness, this godliness that's within, really is the expression of God in the heart that shows itself in the life. In other words, it's God manifest. It's God within, and God, if God is within, God is going to be manifest. And that's what this life is all about, the manifestation of God. It is the display of God. It is a heart in devotion to God, a heart that feels devoted to God. You cannot live this life absent a devotion to God. It is also shows itself in an attitude of reverence toward God. You cannot live the life that is being described and be irreverent. It shows itself in a reverence for God. That's what godliness is. It is a perpetual recognition of God, a perpetual realization of God, a perpetual awareness of God. It's the heart being occupied with God. And the reason that so many who profess salvation cannot and have not lived a consistent Christian life. They're on for a week or two and then they're off for 6 months. Then they come on for another week or two and then they're off again. It's because they lack the being. They lack the purity of heart. You cannot live this life without being made anew. So it's going to be a consistent life. And again, this purity, this holiness, this godliness of heart shows itself in a right attitude toward God and in a right response toward God. And by a right response toward God, it's basically, yes, Lord. That's the right response to God. So purity of heart is also the habit of being one mind with God. It is being in agreement with God. You cannot live this life that is presented and not be one mind with God and not be in agreement with God. This purity of heart possesses a sensitivity toward God. Sensitive to God's voice. Sensitive to God's moving. Purity of heart strives to be free from sin. When we talk about purity of heart, on this earth. We're not talking about perfection. We're talking about a force within. And this purity of heart strives to be free from sin. The pure in heart do not regard iniquity in their heart. Psalm 66, verse 18. The pure in heart take no delight in sin. Paul said in Romans 7, verse 15, speaking of the battle within him, he says, the thing that I hate, that I do. The thing he hates, of course, is the sin. Those who are pure in heart take no delight. Doesn't mean they don't sin, but they take no delight in sin. And they do not make provision for sin. Notice Romans 13, verse 14. Good piece of advice here. But put on the Lord Jesus Christ and make not provision for the flesh to fulfill the lust thereof. You do not give the flesh a leash. You do not give the flesh any room. You make no provision for sinful flesh. And that's what the pure in heart will do. It is a pure heart breathes after purity. They want sinless perfection. We do not attain it in this life, but they desire it. They desire it. Purity of heart desires to be in communion with God. You can't live this life. You can't live the Christian life. You can't live the life that's being described here and not be in communion with God. You can't live the Christian life. You can't live this life that's being described and be apart from God. It'll never work. It'll never happen. Purity of heart is spiritual mindedness. It involves the heart being taken with spiritual matters and thinking upon spiritual things. Notice in Philippians 4, another familiar verse, Philippians 4. Verse 8. Finally, brethren, whatsoever things are true, whatsoever things are honest, whatsoever things are just, whatsoever things are pure, whatsoever things are lovely, whatsoever things are of good report, if there be any virtue, and if there be any praise, think on these things. And that's what the pure in heart do. The mind plays a huge role in the Christian life. The mind plays a huge role in spirituality. The mind has to be spiritual. Purity of heart leads to that. Notice Colossians 3, verse 1. If ye then be risen with Christ, that's a state of being, seek those things which are above, where Christ sitteth on the right hand of God. Set your affection on things above, not on things of the earth. What you look upon is what you think upon. And we must set our affections on things above. Purity of heart seeks to obey the Lord in all things. It is a heart that is inclined toward God. It's not inclined toward the world. It's inclined toward God. It's inclined toward the ways of God. It's not inclined toward the ways of the world. It's inclined toward the ways of God. It seeks to keep every known commandment. It doesn't look for loopholes. It seeks to keep the commandments of God. It seeks to obey. It's not looking for ways to get around obedience. That's not purity of heart. We see the pure in heart have a heartfelt desire to do the will of God. They have a heartfelt desire to do the will of God, to know the will of God, to do the will of God. And there's a fervency of spirit for the things of the Lord. Notice Romans 12. Romans 12, verse 11. Not slothful in business, fervent in spirit, serving the Lord. And that's what purity of heart does. Causes one to be fervent in spirit, serving the Lord. Purity in heart possesses pure motives. That is, what it does for the right reasons. And the right reason is to do it unto the glory of God. If our motives are wrong, then the whole thing is corrupt. The motives have to be pure. We need to often examine our motives for what we do. Why do we do what we do? Well, I do it so the Lord will bless me. That's a wrong motive. That makes you the motive. It's a wrong motive. There's only one motive, and that's for the glory of God. And the purity of heart shows itself in proper motives. And then I want to spend a little bit of time. Purity of heart is an unmixed heart. Purity is unmixed. It's pure. It's pure. It is what the Bible calls, in 2 Corinthians 1, verse 12, godly sincerity. Godly sincerity. What is sincere is pure. What is sincere is unmixed. So purity of heart is a heart that is unmixed. It's unmixed. It is truth within the heart. Notice in Psalm 51. Psalm 51, verse 6. Psalm 51, verse 6. Behold, thou desirest truth in the inward parts. Truth goes along with sincerity. Truth unmixed from error. Unmixed with error. Truth in the inward parts. And in the hidden part. Thou shalt make me to know wisdom. Psalm 51 in verse 10, it is the same as the clean heart and a right spirit. So there is to be an unmixed heart. This is the same as a sound heart. A sound heart is a stable heart. A sound heart is a healthy heart. You cannot live this life outside of stability of heart and health, spiritual health in heart. Notice in Psalm 119, verse 80. Psalm 119, verse 80. Let my heart be sound in thy statutes, that I be not ashamed. Let my heart be sound, stable, healthy, in Proverbs chapter 14, verse 30. Proverbs 14. And verse 30. A sound heart is the life of the flesh. A sound heart is life. Is life. A sound heart, a pure heart's the one and the same. This purity of heart is singleness of heart. Again, it's unmixed. It's singleness of heart for God. Notice in Acts chapter 2. Acts chapter 2. Verse 46. And they, continuing daily with one accord in the temple, and breaking bread from house to house, did eat their meat with gladness and singleness of heart. Singleness of heart. Unmixed. Singleness of heart. Ephesians 6, verse 5. Ephesians 6, verse 5. Servants, be obedient to them that are your masters according to the flesh, with fear and trembling, in singleness of your heart, as unto Christ. Singleness of heart. Colossians 3. Colossians 3, verse 22. Servants, obey in all things your masters according to the flesh, not with eye servants as men pleasers, but in singleness of heart, fearing God. Singleness of heart. This is opposed to a double heart, a double mind. A heart that is filled with so many other things that will not result in the life that is being described. And that's the big problem today amongst God's people, is their hearts are distracted by so many other things. There's so many other things that fill their hearts. There's not a singleness of heart. So things get in the way of this life. We like to blame it. People like to blame it on society. Well, it's just the way the world is. No, it's a heart problem. It's a heart problem. It's a heart problem. And that's what we have to realize. It's not society. Society does not really present a problem to real Christianity. It's a heart problem. There has to be singleness of heart. This is why worship is either non-existent or mighty close to it. Because there's no singleness of heart. There's too many other things. And God's people, for the most part, don't want it any other way. They want to have their hearts crammed full. There has to be singleness of heart. Notice in 1 Chronicles chapter 12. Again, this is the opposite or opposed to a double heart or mind. 1 Chronicles chapter 12, verse 33. Of Zebulun, such as went forth to battle, expert in war, with all instruments of war, 50,000, which could keep rank. They knew their place. They could keep rank. Here's why. They were not of a double heart. They were not of double heart. They had a singleness of heart. They had one thing on their mind. And that's goes along with purity of heart. Notice in Psalm 12. Psalm 12, verse 2. They speak vanity, everyone with his neighbor, with flattering lips, and with a double heart do they speak. There's a lack of sincerity, which again is part of this pure heart. James chapter 1. James chapter 1. Verse 8. A double-minded man is unstable. Again, remember what a sound heart is? A sound heart is a stable heart. Purity of heart, sound heart. A double-minded man is unstable in all his ways. You can't depend on him, because you never know what's going to be on his mind or on his heart. Goes back and forth. He's unstable. That's why it takes the pure of heart to live this life. James chapter 4, verse 8. Draw nigh to God, He will draw nigh to you. Cleanse your hands, ye sinners. Purify your hearts, ye double-minded. That is, get all the nonsense out. Get rid of it. That's what it means to purify your hearts. Ye double-minded. That's the problem. It's a double heart, double-minded. Psalm 24, verse 3 and 4, the pure in heart are described as those who do not lift up their heart to vanity, but they have a single-minded devotion to God. If we're going to live this life, so many want to have a large portion in the world and also live the kingdom life as well. It doesn't work that way. It requires purity of heart. It requires a single-minded devotion to God. And that is almost non-existent today. Nor, and I could prove it in many ways, nor are very many even interested in having a single-mindedness for God. Again, there has to be a disconnect with the world. And God's people, for the most part, almost 100%, and that's what I mean by the most part, refuse to be disconnected from the world. Can't stand it. Can't stand the thought of it. Then we come to the blessing. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. Now I believe that is a twofold fulfillment. I believe it has fulfillment in this life. They shall see God. They shall see Him by faith. A lot of people, a lot of God's people, they don't see God. They don't see God in this life. They can't. They've got too much junk in their hearts. They don't have a single heart. But the pure in heart, they shall see God. They shall see Him by faith in this life, and they will see Him in the life to come, of course. But seeing God in this life speaks of faith. Hebrews 11, verse 27, this results in endurance, which is the ability to withstand. The ability to withstand. If we're going to live the life that is presented, you have to have the ability to withstand everything that gets in the way. And it's the pure in heart, they see God. They walk by faith. And they have the ability to withstand. A lot of God's people, they can't withstand anything. It doesn't take anything to throw them off course. It could rain, and they're off course for a week. It just doesn't take much. Why? It's a heart problem. It's a heart problem. There's not the purity of heart. There's not the singleness of heart. They do not see God. And therefore, they do not have this endurance. Seeing God in this life is fellowship with God. They shall see God. They shall have fellowship with God. It is nearness to God. There's a nearness to God with purity of heart. There's a walking with God. There's a knowledge and understanding of God. So we absolutely have to have purity of heart. This needs to be our being. Blessed are the pure in heart. You cannot live the Christian life. Again, I've told people all the time, quit trying to live the Christian life. You've got to be something. You might as well beat your head against that wall. If you're not the being that is required, you're not going to be able to live it. Not consistently. And that's discouraging. And that's tiring. And that's misery. So God help us that He would bless us with a pure heart. Next week we'll look at verse 9. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called the children of God. Brother Ben, if you'll come and lead us